Bonjour. Gisa Indigenous guys. Wabajay Shido Dem, Al Pleasant Dojaba, Inwa Grand Amson Dojaba. Jiboy Minwa Dawa Nishnabe and Daw. Kachim Gweshka BGAC, Mompi, Nango. I was asked to share a few words, and I've been thinking about this for a few days about what would I talk about. And one of the first thoughts that come to my mind is I thought about my brother Jim, Joseph James Genia. He didn't attend this boarding school. He actually attended the one in Harbor Springs that remained open until 1983. And my brother, about 10 years ago, died from alcoholism at the age of 37. And both my grandparents, Hazel Pontiac, attended this school. My grandfather, Joe Kenwap Kizzy John, attended this school. And then my grandfather ended up going down to Haskell. Ironically, Haskell now is a university, All-American Indian University. But before then it was a boarding school. And I thought about why are we gathering here today? And I remember that we have over 155, 160 Anishinaabe, they're undocumented and unaccounted for, that attended this school. Nobody knows what happened to them. And I looked at some of the names on that sheet. There's a lot of Pontiacs on there, a lot of Jacksons, a lot of Bennetts, people that still are part of this community today. Now, where I work as the administrator for the Saginaw Chippewa Behavioral Health Services, unfortunately, I hear a lot of the stories that families and individuals come in to seek help for. Alcoholism, drug addiction, sexual, physical, emotional, verbal abuse, domestic violence. And then I thought about my own upbringing, being raised in a single-parent family, watching my brother and sister go through their own alcohol and drug addiction, in and out of treatment centers, not able to keep employment, not able to finish school on time, things like that. And as a child growing up without a father, oftentimes, and I see it today, even in our youth today, they're not exactly sure of themselves. They're not sure, where do they fit in? Which way do they follow? 3 years ago, when we did the Journey for Forgiveness, which was a 4.5, 5-mile walk from our tribal center to here, we heard testimony about how the boarding schools didn't teach us how to love, how to express emotion, our feelings. It was so military and regimented that being away from our families, being stripped of the attempt to strip of our identity, cut our hair, take away our clothes, forbidden to speak our language, for all of our people that have kind of grown up wondering, you know, when does some of this stop? Why don't my mom and dads, how come they aren't together anymore? How come they don't come home on time? How come they continue to do this and to do that? I want to let you know, and your parents or grandparents, that it's not your fault. It's not your fault. So if you're like me and you felt ashamed and hung your head for things that you're not proud of or that you've done, one of the first teachings that we need to do and to allow is self-forgiveness. Because until we actually forgive ourselves for things that we're not proud of, we're still putting out things that we don't feel good about, and we treat other people in that way. Because we haven't talked about these things. And I'm very proud of the Saginaw Chippewa tribe, Zeebwing, and the MIBS committee for allowing such a covered up agenda by the United States of America, a story untold yet today in our history books, in our universities. I'm proud that they are allowing this to happen so that we can talk about what happened and how what happened still affects us today in 2012. In that process of healing and wellness, part of that process is to be able to acknowledge what has happened, that which has not been acknowledged before. Now my brother, he didn't have a voice. You know, I used to get very angry. You know, why can't you do this? Why can't you do this? You know, I kind of got tired of visiting them in jail, treatment centers. But I understand why I was so angry, because of things that happened. Let's not make any mistake that the boarding school era was an attempt to eliminate all Anishinaabe spirit from our people. Well, guess what? They failed. They failed. All you need to do is look around here today and see that our medicines are out. We have our fire keepers. We have our day wagon. The same things they said that we could not do when they operated the boarding schools. But we are doing that today because we are proud of who we are, and we can talk about what has happened. Three years ago, my sister was here. She was dropped off at the Harbor Springs boarding school. It was very emotional for her to be here because she's never talked about her experience there. And she told me that all she would hear at night are the boys' side of the dorms, the boys screaming at night. And then I asked my mom privately, I said, "Have you ever talked to my sister about what happened there?" And it was evident that they did talk about it. My mom acknowledged that all the way home to Grand Rapids that she cried. My sister was dropped off and thought that she was abandoned. And I'm thankful that even though my sister is physically disabled, that she is sober today, and that she's able to enjoy life with the best that she can. Growing up, when I was about 8 years old, I didn't know what kind of journey I was on, but I traveled with the Martin family and Shannon and my mom, and we were on this long trip out to Washington, D.C. to the longest walk, the original longest walk. It's probably the last trip they want to take with us, but... And when we got there, all I seen was hundreds and thousands of our people fighting for indigenous rights here in America. I was 8 years old. I didn't know what it was about, but that kind of started my journey. And I remember in Grand Rapids, in front of the Gerald R. Ford, they used to have our powwow there. And I remembered every time that I had to go out into the circle, I had to ask my brother to go out there with me because I was too scared to go alone. But yet, I was drawn to that day wagon, that drum. And eventually, when I got older, I would start singing and dancing, etc. But I'm here to tell you today that there are a lot of our Anishinaabe young people who are looking to take your hand so that you can help them in that circle. Because until you do, for a lot of our young people who are not sure where they fit in and where they belong, they're sitting outside that circle, sitting on the sidelines. When they would rather be out there dancing and singing at that day wagon. There's a lot of our young people who are still going through the same kind of abuse that our grandparents or parents did when they were at the boarding schools. That's sad. It really is sad. A lot of them are growing up in single parent families. They're coming home. Parents are at home. Might be drinking, doing other things, gambling, doing other things, and not coming home. Now, I've made a lot of mistakes in my own life, and I still continue to fumble. And my two younger sons are here today. And the reason why I live an alcohol and drug-free life today, that I not try to commit acts of violence, that I speak up here for those who may not be strong enough to speak, is I do it for them. And I do it for my grandkids that are coming after them, I think. And so I made a decision, even a long time ago, even in high school, when it wasn't popular to not drink, to not do drugs. I made a decision back then that I wasn't going to let that be a part of my life. And so I raised my own children in an alcohol and drug-free home. I made sure that when their mom and I was together at that time, that I never tried to speak badly towards her, that I never hit her. that my boys will never see me in jail or have to come visit me or even come to my funeral. It doesn't make me better than anybody. And when I see people come into behavioral health and other service into the courts, I sit there and I wonder sometimes, has this story been told to them? Do they know the history of what happened here? We have people that come into treatment that they never knew what tobacco was used for. They smudged for the first time. They understood how to use sweetgrass. But for a lot of them, they grew up in the cities where we didn't have those cultural supports or that knowledge. And so our own tribal community members, and it's not their fault. But for the first time, they're learning how to use those medicines in a good way to help them in their own recovery, on their own journey in life. We have another kind of a war that's happening in our own tribal community. It's a topic that a lot of people don't like to talk about. But we have a lot of spiritual and religious prejudice and racism, a lack of respect. And there was a teaching that was given to me one time about spiritual freedom. And what that means to me is that I don't care if you take people from all over the world, that I could sit down and I could pray with them. Because I know who I am. When you know who you are as a Anishinaabe, you're not afraid. You don't fear that. And when we do that and say, well, don't do this, and don't practice that, and don't believe this way, we are doing exactly what the boarding school era intended to happen. And that was to divide us. It's called lateral oppression, lateral violence, and it exists in our communities. Because of the way someone believes. Because if I go to that Otiswanning or that sweat lodge, that makes me a bad person. If I go to church, that makes me a bad person. That's not who we are. So we have not healed yet as a community until we can sit in one circle and pray together. Do you guys understand? That's the connection to the boarding schools, exactly what they wanted to see happen. Take that away from us. And I asked my grandpa, Joe John, I asked him, how come you didn't pass that language down to my mom and to my aunties and my uncles? And I love my grandpa. Both my grandpa and grandpa spoke that language fluently. I could hear them in the other room talking that language, but they would never talk it in front of us. And my grandpa, he said, well, go get your education first. And then if you want to learn about your culture, you can do that later. Basically, everybody that went to the boarding school was brainwashed in that way. If you take away our language, you take away part of our identity. You cut our hair, you take away a part of that identity. Take away our drum. You're trying to take away our identity. It has to be okay to talk about these things because they exist today. We are Anishinaabe, and that means something in our language. That means we are supposed to love and care for one another. And we have people today that, and I don't mean to offend anyone, that, well, that boarding school didn't really impact me at all. And I think to myself, do you speak your language today? Do you put your sama out every day? Do you know how to use that mushkadewash, that wingush? Do you talk bad about your other family member that believes another way? That's what the boarding school was an agenda. The boarding school had a purpose. By 1900, 99% of our Anishinaabe, U.S. American Indian population was dead. 99%. Today, we still only make up 1.5% of the total U.S. population today. So we have to support one another. We have to make healthy decisions and choices for our children and our great-grandchildren. And I applaud the people that were up here today that were part of that video documentary. The other people that shared. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of strength. And I say miigwech for sharing your story. So where do we go from here today? You know, I know for the Holy Childhood Harbor Springs schools, they decided to take down that building because it was a memory they didn't want to see anymore. I know that decision hasn't been made here today locally in our community. But I see a purpose in all of us gathering here so that our young people that don't know the history, the public, that we make sure that they don't forget. So I apologize if I'm sounding a little bit negative. It was kind of funny before I got up here. My son asked me, he's like, where are they doing the guided tours? And I said, well, after I share a few words. Why did they ask you? You know, and I thought I would just share a little humor because this stuff can be real heavy. I know. I can tell you, growing up, I grew up with a lot of anger because I knew a lot of the history. And I was living in Grand Rapids. It's kind of like you against the world in the community. Going to public schools, we're the only Native student going through in that classroom, even at the university at Grand Valley State. So we have to be that voice for them and for others. And I just say chimigwech for everyone for being here. I want to thank those Eagle staff runners that ran this morning, that carried those names, the 154, 159 people that went to this school that went unaccounted for, undocumented, that never made it home. never made it back either. At this time, I'm asking that day wagon and I'm asking all of us, if we can stand, if we can join hands, if we can show unity. And I have asked them and I've given them tobacco to sing a victory song, because we are here today. We have not died, and we will continue to move forward and talk about things that might be uncomfortable for other people to hear. And we will continue to invite our young people, our youth, into that circle who are too afraid to ask. And so if we can stand at this time, if you're physically able to, and make that connection next to your neighbor beside you. I've asked the drum to do a victory song because we are here today, and we're going to continue to move forward as Anishinaabe people. Chimigwech, drum, if you can give us that song at this time.